Welcome to this morning's Future Insight podcast panel discussion. I'm thrilled to have you with us as we explore the ideas, innovations, and emerging trends that are shaping tomorrow's world. Today we're excited to welcome our guests for today's panel session, which we've titled Leading the Next Era of Educational Transformation, From Vision to Measurable Impact. So before we begin, I want to afford our panelists an opportunity to provide just a little bit of background insight into your professional journey and your current position that you hold. So we will start with Dr. Bice.
Good morning, everyone.
There we go.
Okay, so great to be back in Chicago. My professional journey has, not been the straight line as we hoped for maybe in high school. It's been jagged circles, up and down mountains, and so it's quite unique as everybody's story in reality. I started my career in education after I was a little bit of a late bloomer because I went into the airlines for a little while. And so I worked for Eastern Airlines. And if you're old enough, you know what happened to Eastern Airlines. If you're not, you can watch the movie Wall Street, and that will tell you what happened to Eastern Airlines, except we lost. And the airline went bankrupt. But I got back into education. I was actually a teacher, then a counselor. And I served in counseling at every level, pre-K through 12. For about a decade, and but the one thing that Eastern Airlines taught me is resilience. I got myself back in school immediately through that whole process, and I vowed I would never stop going to school. So and my goal was to have my doctorate and my second baby by the time I was 40, and I was able to accomplish that. I went into higher ed, kind of, not even. That wasn't my plan. It was not my plan to go into higher ed. I wanted to be at the executive level of school districts. So my doctoral degree was in executive education superintendency. And but I was approached by a dean of a particular university in Missouri to become a faculty member, and I had just had a baby, and he said, "Aren't you tired of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning? And this will be so much easier." How many of you are faculty in here? Yes, even though we think as faculty that's a very draining job compared to a high school counselor, no, it's not. So he lured me into higher ed, and I had a great time. And through my husband's work, somehow got in with another institution, another university, and it was literally within 3 weeks that I became a dean. So suddenly the door of administration, which again, middle school, never wanted to be an administrator. My dad was an administrator. There's no way I was going to do that. So God has a funny sense of humor, I think. So I worked at that institution as a dean for about a decade, and got an opportunity actually to move from that, and it was great because when I became a dean there, we went from about 0 online programs. One you could call, it was kind of partially online, to about 14 at the time. By the time I left, so it was a really growing institution, one of the largest in the state of Missouri. But my husband had, he kind of said to me, he goes, "You've never even seen what else is out there." And I have to give lots of credit to my husband, Doug, because he's just always been an encourager and a supporter. And so I put my name out there, and I had an opportunity to go. There's about 4 places, actually. 3 of them needed fixing, and one of them was an open book, and that was Miami-Dade College, and it happens to be the largest college in the United States. And so they were needing a dean and chief academic officer, dean of faculty, at their smallest college, which at that time was about 3,500 students, smallest campus. It's the largest college. They had well over 165,000 students. And I thought I was never going to leave. And a long story short, an old friend from the university in Missouri called me. I probably would have never left that institution ever in Florida. It was my home. I was home. They were my people. But this one particular colleague I really respected, and he was a new president at Missouri Valley, which is up here. And I view Missouri Valley as kind of like a startup, even though it's like 150 years old. His leadership is absolutely transforming, that we're going to talk about today. And so I made the jump back to Missouri from Florida, and a new grandson coming didn't hurt the decision either. So that's kind of the long and short of my career. So I currently serve as the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Missouri Valley College. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Bice. Next up is Dr. Tom Philion, who is a former colleague of mine in Illinois. We go way back, so I will turn it over to him to give you a little bit of insight into his journey and his current position. Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Good to see all of you. I began my career as an educator, as a middle school reading teacher in New York City. I decided after earning a master's degree I wanted to get out into the world and actually practice having conversations with kids about books. And just fell in love with the whole idea. So I eventually left that and went to Michigan, got a doctorate in English and education, trying to keep together those two passions of mine. Worked for 2 years in the Detroit public schools, wrote a dissertation about that experience, and then ended up here in Chicago and began my circuit around Chicago universities. I started as an English educator at UIC, working in the English department, leading their English education program. I moved to Roosevelt in 1999, had a long career there, ran a writing project, working with teachers in the Chicago public schools, helping them to improve their teaching of writing. Eventually fell into administrative roles, became a chair, associate dean, eventually dean for 9 years, and then decided in 2022 to make a late career shift and move to Northeastern Illinois University, where I've been working for the last 4 years. We'll talk more about what I've been doing, but really enjoyed the whole journey, actually. I'm going to retire in December, so I guess I'm at that moment where when I can really appreciate kind of what the whole profession, appreciate the opportunity to reconnect with Dean and kind of remember those great times.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Okay, and our third panelist is Dr. Glen Brodowsky.
Good morning. My name is Glen Brodowsky, and I am the Dean of the Heller College of Business in that tall building right there at Roosevelt University. And I live in the building just adjacent to this one on the right. But I'm not from Chicago. I'm from New York. I graduated from the University of Chicago with a degree in Far Eastern languages and civilizations. I became fluent in Chinese in the 80s and thought I would have this fabulous career making tons of money in industry and retire into higher education and tell war stories. And that's not what happened, because Tiananmen Square happened, everything closed down. It was the time I said, I speak Chinese and you should hire me. And they said, no, thank you. And so I was working in Chicago in the late 80s at the Berlitz Language Center, selling language training to all these wannabe bilingual people who had the jobs I wanted in business. And I wanted an MBA and I couldn't get in because I didn't have the right experience. So I wound up in a program in Buffalo, New York, which had the first MBA program ever in the People's Republic of China. Quit my job, went there and found out that Tiananmen Square had happened, and they closed the program down, but they treated me well, and I stayed for 6 years and had a hard time getting a teaching position in the recession of '92, but wound up at a new campus in California at California State University, San Marcos, which was founded in '89. I got there in '96. There was the founding faculty. I was part of the confounding faculty, and we built that campus from 4,000 students in '96 to 17,000 students when I left in 2024. I actually retired from Cal State University, San Marcos in August of '24, but in July of '24, I became dean at Roosevelt because one day in California, I was just noodling around online and said, dean's position in Chicago, because I had bought a retirement apartment next door. And up came Roosevelt, 4 blocks away. And I couldn't pass up the opportunity. And so I applied and I got the job. And so this is my retirement, to be the dean that I always wanted to have. And I'm hoping I'm doing it right. And I'm really happy to be back in Chicago. And it's really nice after 2 years of walking by this lovely building every single morning to actually open the door and come in and be here with you this morning. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. All right, so the format for today's panel, we're going to have certain topics that we thought were most relevant that we'll introduce, and then each of our panels will have an opportunity to comment on those. And then we've reserved some time at the end for audience questions and answers as well. So what we'll do is, Glenn, we'll start with you. And the first topic is, what does educational transformation mean in 2026? And how is it different from changes universities have experienced over the past decade?
Well, it's at warp speed right now. We're coming out of the pandemic, which changed everything from, I remember talking about distance education in the early 2000s and online, and it wasn't until we had a gun to our heads in the 2020 when we all went from one day being in person to then being online. And during that whole transformation phase, we never thought, well, what's it going to be like when we come back? And then all of a sudden we were back and everybody wanted to stay online. And so we were always playing catch up in higher education, and the technology has really, we can't keep up with it. So I think it has changed so fast that we're still trying to catch up, but I think we need to be more intentional about planning and acknowledging that the 4-year model of, you're 18, you come out at 22, you get a job. That's not the reality for any of our students. They're all working full time. And also with the changes that are going on, what you know at 22 will be outdated when you're 23, so you'll have to come back and have new educational experiences throughout your career, which may not be degrees, but might be a continuing education, updating our skills. And we need to adapt our institutions to keep up with the changing complexion of our student body, which is adult learners. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd echo most of that. It seems to me that the 20 years ago, the big changes all involve technology and kind of new approaches to credentialing, competency-based learning, for-profit institutions. There was a lot of excitement. I would say innovation was the code word. And conversely, there was also the beginning of the economic stresses that we're seeing today. I think they've only become sharpened in the last several years. I don't know if you read the Chronicle of Higher Education. I check it out almost every day. It's amazing, the list of universities. They're showing up with 40 million in higher deficits. I just think we've been able to make it through. The pandemic actually helped universities, I think, to sustain their current structures and many of their practices, or at least I think the forward-looking institutions started to adapt and try out new approaches. I do think looking forward that we'll see a reduction in the numbers not only of students but therefore of institutions, and I think that will impact both the private and the public spheres. So what do we need, and where are we headed? What are good strategies for surviving? I think there are two things that just have increased importance. One is quality, however you define that. I like what Glenn said about, we need to focus on new populations within the college sphere, and they're not so much new populations as they are often overlooked populations. NEIU is a largely Hispanic minority serving institution. We've been doing that, serving those students for years. What we need to do is show that we can actually help these students move, increase their skills and their abilities to move forward, as we all were able to over the last 25, 30 years. And then at the same time, I just think we're gonna have to become much more focused in what we do. NEIU, for example, is like many of the institutions here, has probably over 60 undergraduate degree programs, put on another 40 to 60 graduate degree programs. I think we're all going to have to really focus in the future, perhaps downsize and really figure out what we're really good at and can make a convincing argument to the larger public, to student populations about what we do best.
Thank you.
So I agree with both of those statements. I'll try to add something a little bit on top of that. In the last decade, we were adapting to disruption. Some might say chaos, with the pandemic. That's a given. I think the future, we definitely have to be intentional. I learned a lot from working at a quote-unquote community college in the state of Florida. All the community colleges are four-year institutions. At Miami-Dade College, we had over 37 bachelor's degrees, and definitely a Hispanic serving population. And what I learned there was we had a lot of doctors, like MDs coming from Cuba, Venezuela, very highly educated, but could not get a job here in the United States because of licensing limitations and things like that. And so we quickly, and it happened, but right about the time I got there, they already obviously had credentialing and things like that, but we exponentially increased our micro-credentials. And that served not just the undergrad students, but it also served those highly experienced experts coming in, trying to make a new life in a free world, right? And so the micro-credentialing, it was very intentional because we wanted to make sure it was stackable. And so a person coming in, they could get a micro-credential, they could stack it into an associate's, a bachelor's, and so on and so forth. And so it was very intentional. Flexibility is the key. The current student comes from all different backgrounds and has just as many goals in their life or needs. Sometimes it is to get a degree, sometimes it's to upskill in their job. As far as the online learning versus the in-person, my daughter's now in a program, one of the top 25 in the nation, where it's very flexible. She can attend a course in her MBA asynchronously, synchronously, or in person. She's got the option. She has to make the decision before the term starts, for example. But I think we've got to fit the needs. And what you said about downsizing too. My current president, going from the largest college to the smallest college, state-funded, state school to a private liberal arts, every day we're reading in the headlines that there's one closing, right? And we don't want to be those headlines. And so my current president truly is phenomenal. He's got outstanding records in enrollment management. That was his background. And he basically, has the mantra, we we wake up every morning hungry, and we've got to be able to not just enroll students, and our college is well known. We've got the most scholar athletes in the NAIA conference, and so most of our students want to play a sport, and so that's a particular group that we are catering to. But there's so much more, and so how are we engaging the students? How are we giving them a sense of belonging? What other supports are we giving them just other than playing sports and getting a degree? How are we preparing them for their future career and even beyond, being connected to them for a lifetime, right? And so it is very intentional in nature. We have something you can read about it even called the Viking Voyage, where it's a commitment to give them experiential learning. The whole, the Dr. Kuh, if you are familiar with his work, it's all about experiential learning. And so starting that early on, those high impact practices, the student research that builds upon even high schools now who have research, but builds from the freshman year. We have a student research symposium every term. And so it starts with a freshman maybe that might be uncomfortable, just going, right? Just going. Dip your toe in. And then the next term, maybe you're helping, you're supporting it, you're participating in setting up the tables in some way or something like that. But the biggest effort is push of the faculty, put this in your syllabus. Something about this student symposium should be in your syllabus, giving you, it should be part of the grade. So again, preparing them for life in whatever terms they need. And when I say they, students, whether it's, again, somebody already out there in the field needing to upskill, to somebody that's just starting out and not sure what they want to do. And it's our obligation to make sure that they're ready. They're hitting the ground running I always loved it. Another institution I came from, who's represented here by one of my former faculty members, who's still a faculty member there, Dr. Aldridge, was hitting the ground running. We wanted people hiring our graduates thinking that, wow, this doesn't seem like a first-year employee. This person seems like they've been here for 2 or 3 years. That's always the goal. Leaving the world better than we found it. Leaving opportunities more than what it was for us. And I loved what you said, becoming the dean that you wanted to have. I love that. I'm going to adapt that and say that, because I try to be that too. Like I did want to be an administrator, but then I was afraid of who would be the administrator, and plus, who would I be working for then? And it is because you want to be the best that you can be, right? And you want to help people and motivate people to be the best they can be.
Excellent. Thank you. We find ourselves in Chicago, and it's the home of many great sporting teams. I've always been a lifelong White Sox fan. When it comes to hockey, this is the home of the Chicago Blackhawks. Although he wasn't a Blackhawk, Wayne Gretzky is noted for having introduced a principle known as the Gretzky principle, talking about his success was not skating to where the puck was at, but skating to where the puck was going to be. So for our panel here, the next question kind of talks to where the puck is going to be. You did a great job of talking about here and now, where the puck is at, but if you would, looking ahead 5 years, what is the single most important transformation you believe higher education must achieve to remain relevant and impactful?
I want to answer that with a question. And how many of you in this room are first-generation college students? That's been a narrative I've heard my entire career. We serve first-generation college students. The problem is that what happens to our kids and grandkids who are second and third-generation college students? Do they just go off to the Ivy League and we just keep our institutions as, assuming that there's going to be a never-ending stream of 18-year-olds for the first in their family to graduate? Or how do we look at the next generation and how do we serve them? Because they're coming. They're coming from households that do have computers, that do know technology. So how do we keep up with them? So that, to me, is a big transfer. We talk about a lot of the demographics. That's that narrative, first generation, Hispanic serving. That's a very, that model's 20 years old now. And you can't just keep doing the same thing because that's not the population who's coming. So we have to look at the changing demographics. The demographic cliff. There is not as many 18-year-olds, but there are 28-year-olds that do need our services, and they need to be equipped to pivot in their careers and keep. A lot of faculty want to forbid AI. It's like it's here. We were afraid of the internet. We were afraid of a lot of technology. MOOCs. How do you remember MOOCs? MOOCs were going to replace us all. They're nowhere to be seen, but we panicked and had our hair on fire about it for about 2 years. Stop being so reactive to the changes as, oh my God, the sky is falling. And look at things as opportunities for what can we do with this to transform ourselves? And that's got to be a wholesale transformation of faculty who think it's always been this way. We've always had classes on Mondays and Wednesdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays, never on Friday. Oh my God, we have no parking, no classrooms on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. How about Friday? Or what about internships? We should send students out to work in companies. Employees are not going to the office. Why should students? So we're not keeping up with the changes. And we have to adapt and pivot, because otherwise we will be going the way of the dodo bird. And I think that's why a lot of institutions are folding up their tents, because they were great in their day, but that's not what we're looking for right now. Thanks.
I guess I would say that what's needed depends on where you are geographically and what kind of institution you are in the spectrum, very stratified spectrum of institutions. So at a place like NEIU, a regional comprehensive university, I suspect it's really not that different from Missouri Valley. The value proposition, like why is it worthwhile for me to spend my money and go here? What am I going to get out of it? How can I enhance the sense of belonging so that people really see it's not just getting a degree or getting a job. It's also about the relationships you're going to form. It's about really feeling like your identity is valued and supported. I think at other institutions, I think there are some really interesting examples, especially in the public sphere, but you see these same kinds of institutions in the private sphere too. Here in Chicago, National Louis University, for example, really functions as a very robust, interesting, sort of private version of a public university. I think the thing for the future is, how do we scale, or how do we connect? So I think in Chicago, for example, I'll just use a local example, we have a very strong flagship university, UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago. We also have Chicago State on the south side, Northeastern Illinois on the northwest side of Chicago. How can those institutions work together, become more of a team in the way that they serve their students? I'm really intrigued by the success that Georgia State has had in sort of really transforming itself as an institution and serving a much larger population. Arizona State gets a lot of kudos in the press for what they've been able to do in this regard. And then I think when you look at our elite institutions, they're still really important, hugely valuable, largely under attack, primarily because of an accusation that there's a lack of diverse viewpoints. I'm not aligning myself with those attacks, but I will say that there is a lot of inside chatter within higher education. I see that at my institution, I hear about it at other institutions. Somehow I think we have to figure out, how are we kind of representing ourselves as institutions that serve the entire public who's coming to us or who's in our community. And I think we all believe we are doing that. I certainly believe that. But I don't know that we really have those voices and viewpoints always well represented. And I think that's a challenge for us, just as a larger industry, to figure out how do we reconnect and feel like the whole state actually supports what higher education is up to, or all of the students in my regional area view Missouri Valley State as the kind of the place where I can go and have my dreams realized.
Yeah, I appreciate all those points. The future really depends on how well we're articulating what the value of attending our institution is. And I just read one stat a few days ago that 70%, those who go to college increase their upward economic mobility by 70% as compared to high school degree only. And yet, there's that stat, but coming out of this as a past, I always say recovering counselor, but I was a high school counselor, so I dealt a lot with career education. And even back in the 90s when I was in that position, 2000s, we were making partnerships, and so that's the key word I want you to remember here for a second. Partnerships between our high school and the local community college, which was 2-year, the 4-year institution, into roles that were paying at that time even $90,000 a year for putting together, a car at a car factory. And they couldn't get people into those jobs because that wasn't really a college job, and people didn't understand that there are embedded career paths where you can start here, go through this, get into management, and so on and so forth. Your degree is going to open the door faster for you. But let's talk about data centers for a second. That's a whole new career path. All of the folks that it's going to take to operate those data centers, and love it or not love it, it's going to be here. It is here. It's not going to go away. It's not just people with 4-year degrees or graduate degrees. It's plumbers. It's electricians. It's all of those people. And when was the last time any of you tried to get an electrician to come and give you a bid for work in your house? Anybody? I mean, it's hard to find them, and then it's like 3 months later. Plumbing's the same. those skills have been neglected for quite a while. And so I think we have to find a way. And even when I was a high school counselor, I would say, look, you can do this and it will put you through college. Like, don't give up your dream of college. So I think it's about how are we marketing, how are we communicating the value of going to college? And it goes back to what other values are you learning? You know, students come to their freshman year, and many of them, like I was like this. How many of you were like this? Because my dad was a high school principal. Oh, I'm finally free. I can do what I want. I don't have my dad or his friends looking at what I'm doing every minute, right? And so your freshman year is just that. You're free. And sometimes, like me, I was like, oh, I don't have to go to class every day anymore. They're not going to tell my dad if I don't go to class. Well, that didn't work out too well for me. And so that didn't last long. But that's kind of, they come into that mindset. And so I find the ones that I'm talking to, the students that I'm talking to that are on the probation list or the suspension list, some of it has to do with that. You know, they weren't prepared for just the grit that it took to get through that freshman year successfully academically because they were having too much fun. But that's all kind of part of it. It is finding your roots. Finding your purpose. It's wondering, you know, where your roots are going to be. And I think we have to make sure that we are engaging students on every level. It's not just about the academics. It's about what you can get along the way, and that's why I love the idea of micro-credentials. And, you know, I had a prior provost laugh at me a couple decades ago when I suggested we look into that. That's for community colleges. Well, okay, I'll go to a community college. I mean, literally I did. Because that was the way of the future. I knew it was. And it's okay in a four-year institution, you know. At Miami-Dade, we created a general business credential. It was 4 classes. 3 of them were gen ed classes. They already had them. We backwards credentialed, you know, we reverse credentialed hundreds of thousands of students when we created that because they all had it. The only thing really in business was an intro to business course, but it gave them the skills, you know, and a computer course with all, back then, I don't think they have it anymore because everybody already knows, but the Microsoft Office suite. So what person would be hiring a student, a high school, early college student to maybe help out in the office? What skills do they need to know? And is this micro-credential going to help open the door for them to get an interview? And so again, it's what value can we bring them? How can we help them to market themselves into getting, whether it's a job, an internship, or a scholarship? And again, helping them to understand the value. And as you said, yes, the 18-year-olds are decreasing, but partnerships, I want to come back to that. How many of you are familiar with Higher Learning Commission? It's the accrediting body of most in the Midwest, anyway, most universities. They're now accrediting, did you know that they're now accrediting companies who are offering certificates? And they're getting visits from them and putting their stamp on them. So the companies long ago, Amazon, Google, whatever, were starting to, again, give these credentials, and now they're going to be similar places like that are going to be credentialed by Higher Learning Commission. That's our competition. Some cases it's free, it's very minimal charge. We're competing with that as well. So how, again, what can we offer that's above and beyond that? I think it goes to student advising, student engagement, networking, helping them to have those opportunities to meet future employers, and just having an entrepreneurial mindset as a higher ed person. Gives you everything you need to know, I think, to be prepared for the future.
One I think Tom was hitting on is creating an educational ecosystem where we're not competing, but we're actually building a network. I worked for a system where we had 5 campuses in the LA basin. Do we need a German department on each of those campuses? Do we need small programs, or could we say, well, Dominguez Hills will have the German program, and Long Beach will have French or something else. Every campus does not have to be a complete university. We have to build a university for the region, and that could be across institutions. The second problem is, I don't know about you, but we've seen a decline of young men coming to college. And most degrees now are, campuses are 60, 65, 70% females. Question is, why aren't they coming? And so maybe these guys want to do the trades. Great, become a tradesman, become a plumber. You know what, if you're really good, you're gonna make a lot of money. Now you need to know how to run your business so you can hire other people. Now you need to learn accounting. Maybe you're tired of crawling under sinks when you're 30. It's great when you're 20. Impossible when you're 60, I could attest to that. And so how do we take those careers and say, maybe college isn't for you at 18, but at 25, after you've done something else, this is the perfect time to transition so that you can really scale up your business. And there, we don't have to import students. We have to just bring students back who used to come by meeting with them where they are in their lives.
Quick story about that. My wife's been teaching introductory composition at Roosevelt, and 15 students, 18 students. By the end of the semester, it's like 13 students, and just getting people to show up on time for class, turn in assignments, not need to ask questions, as many questions after receiving the assignments several times, right? One thought I've had, just to support what Glen's saying here, is, you know what? Maybe, this whole idea, the gap year is like the idea now for a upper middle class family. You might postpone college for a year, go have a great experience. I'm just, maybe we need to move more students into some kind of opportunity. It can be in the work world. Public service idea has been around for a long time. How do you learn those essential, dispositional skills that I learned basically on the job as well in school before I went to college, And that seems to me like that might be better than sending tons and tons of high school graduates to community colleges and having, kind of the dropout rates that we have. Yeah.
A couple of our sessions today focus on this next topic, and there's absolutely no denying that generative AI is having an impact on the teaching and learning environments, whether it's in K-12 or in higher education. So a couple of questions to our panelists relative to AI. How should universities balance innovation, academic integrity, and student learning outcomes? And then secondly, what skills do you believe graduates should possess when they leave your institution and enter into an AI-enabled workforce? And I know some of that depends certainly on the degree program and the professions that they're going to be entering as well.
Hi, thank you for that question. Again, I had a world-class postdoc education at Miami-Dade College, and we were one of the first, if not the first, that created a bachelor's degree in AI. Had a lot of experience. The one lead rock star faculty was at my campus, and we had diverse programs at each of our 8 campuses too, so we didn't all do the same thing at every campus. But the one thing that I learned from that, and I came from somebody that we can all change our minds, right? And just Dr. Sinjas, I was invited by our university president to be a sponsor of charter school, and I said to my president, I'm really against charter schools. I wrote a position paper against charter schools in my doctoral program, and he just kind of smiled, and he said, well, we're going to go on a field trip to Chicago. And by the time we were done with that field trip with concept schools, I was ready to enroll both my daughters, right? So you can change your mind. Well, I changed my mind about AI too. I was very adamantly against it. But in the participation in the creation of this degree and being a real part of that, and getting to know also the person who was really the voice of Alexa. She didn't have a college degree, by the way, and she's gotten awards from Microsoft, and she direct report to Jeff Bezos. I learned so much about the support that AI can give. So we don't have to necessarily embrace AI for everything and just go head first into it. We need guardrails, but we do need to embed it into all of our programs. And that means teaching students to be ethical, critically think about it, and utilizing it as a tool. And another little short story, my daughter works for Microsoft, and she's in the finance area, and I said, are you using Copilot? Because, MDC made sure we were all trained on Copilot. And she goes, no, I don't really use it, Mom. No, she's been there about 8 years. And I said, well, do you think your boss is, checking on you to see if they're using their product? Or are you using the product that they actually designed? And she said, yeah, they probably do. And I said, interesting. And she goes, well, I just like to do my original work. She's very, driven and hard worker. She goes, I just don't want it out there. I want to just work with my original work. Well, about 6 months later, I said, yeah, have you started using Copilot or anything yet? And she's like, I did find out, I'm still using my original work, but when I say, can you compare this trend for this year to this trend this year? I look at it myself, but it will give it to me in seconds. And so she's tested it, she's working with it. And so far, she has survived the last 2 major layoffs of Microsoft. And I do think part of that is, becoming more efficient and utilizing the tool, utilizing it effectively, ethically. We would be remiss if we did not teach our students the value of that. And it's so funny because I'm doing a tutorial this summer for a thesis class at Missouri Valley, and I was looking at the old syllabus, and part of it was, no AI, and I sat down, so I revised that syllabus, of course, to what I wanted it to do, and I sat down with a student and I said, I actually want you to use AI, but this is how I want you to use it, and I went into the details of how I wanted her to use the tools, and why I wanted her to use those tools, and that we were going to have conversations about the use of those tools, because my husband recently had a bout of sepsis. We almost lost him. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. He's fine now. But we literally had a AI nurse in the room with us for a time, which was very disconcerting. But it's there. I can't imagine any career path really probably not utilizing it. And people use it, they don't even know they're using it. You're using it every time you get on your smartphone. It's being used to you, right? It's telling you what you need to buy, and that's AI. So again, to his point, it's not going away, but it's our responsibility to put some guardrails, helping our students to understand the ethics of it. I believe that we all, just like we used to include, everybody needs to do service learning, and everybody needs to do a research project, and everybody needs to do an internship. Everybody needs to have embedded experience to know how to use AI ethically. At MDC, we created just an AI awareness certificate that could be embedded at anything, right? One of the main courses was just AI ethics, ethics in AI. So I just think, again, we have to be responsible to our students. We are obligated to teach them how to be ethical, how to critically think, and just how to make sure they're staying within the legal system of use of these tools that are so wonderful when you do actually learn how to use them the correct way.
I agree entirely with that. In 1999, 2000, I created the first online course actually at Roosevelt University. So I tend to be a technology optimist as opposed to a pessimist, and I'm intrigued by the way it can help us kind of do what we want to do or achieve a vision that we have. However, I was trained in a liberal arts tradition myself at Fordham University in New York. And I still and I was an English major, so I continue to believe that reading and writing lead to powerful thinking. It didn't at the beginning with me, but lots of practice, encouragement, kind of led that to be a very powerful strategy for me to use. It's a key to the success of my career, and I still think that's needs to be a really important part of a college education. I would add to it two things that I think are increasingly important moving forward. One is orality. So because in my world, I'm a dean of a college of education, teacher education colleges in general prepare teachers very well to plan for instruction. Teacher educators will complain and are concerned that their students don't plan enough or don't plan well enough. But in general, we're able to give that a lot of focus because there's one really good way to share a lesson plan, and that's to write it down and give it to someone. And that fits within the world of academia. What we're not as good at, a lot of the research shows, is actual instruction, helping our beginning educators to walk into classrooms, be able to engage students, and actually do teaching and have students learn. And I think that oral function is increasingly going to be important in the future because writing is becoming simpler and simpler to do because of the AI tools. So we have to kind of, I think, pivot and start to bring that out because it's an important part of almost every job that I can think of. The other piece too is the data piece. The statistical, be able to look at statistics, understand the data, analyze data, communicate data. That's something that I think I underappreciated as undergraduate. It's something I really have learned on the job. It's really important for being a teacher. It's really important for being an electrician, all kinds of jobs. I think going forward, we need to give more emphasis to that. AI plays a role in that, just like our calculators do, just like our grammar checks do, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I did do a little AI sort of, here's the questions or you're going to be asked on the panel. What do you think? If I was reading this to you, you'd just be looking at me like I was completely nuts. It was a useful thought exercise to have a little dialogue and think about what I might want to say, but you can't just like turn yourself over to these tools. You got to be controlling the tool, using it with real intention.
I love my dog, but what distinguishes human beings from every other life form is our ability to use tools. That's what brought us from being prehistoric to being who we are today. And we have used tools for millennia, and this is yet another tool. When I first started my career at San Marcos, every course had a writing requirement. And we assumed that if we made students write more, they'd become better writers. Well, actually, no, because they had horrible writing skills. So what we thought about is, first you need to learn how to write. And then you need to write to learn. I think that we need to train our young students. We have a generation for whom there has always been an internet, and we're going to have a generation for whom there has always been AI, and they'll know how to use it. So they need to learn how to use it, and then they need to use it in their jobs, because those of us who are older can't figure it out. So we can hire them and say, how can you help us do that? AI, I do all my own writing, and sometimes I'll say, okay, see if you could tighten this up for me. Usually makes a few changes, it's better. Or if I have to make slides, like I had to make a diagram of a process. I said, okay, start on the top with one circle, then branch off, and I really had to give very specific directions to it, like I would be drawing it myself, and it came out as to what I envisioned. But I just didn't say just make a chart. And so it's important to impress upon students that as powerful as it is, artificial intelligence cannot do one thing. It cannot make up for natural stupidity, nor can it cure it. And you have to be smart and use it smartly and make it a tool in your toolbox. And that's got to be from high school to the freshman seminar, and then once they know how to use this and what's acceptable and what's not, you can give assignments that assume that they're going to use it, and then you say, okay, use 3 different tools, use 3 different prompts, and get 3 different essays, and then you compare and contrast and tell me which one is the right one. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. As promised, we want to afford the audience members today an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have a question, if you could please stand and ask your question. And I ask the panelists, when you respond to the question, if you could repeat the question and then respond. So any questions here?
I have one.
Yes, Roddy.
This goes back to the first question you raised to the panelists about changes before, past, and today in higher education. You talked about structural changes within the institutions, resistance to change like technology, the impact of technology on teaching and learning. What kind of changes have you noticed in the learners, and how have you adapted to the change in the learners? Thank you.
Okay.
I'll repeat the question that we talked about. A lot of what's changed structurally in our industry, in teaching and learning, in faculty, in technology, but what have we noticed about changes in the learners? And I've got a room full of people who went to high school online. And even though they're in person, I still imagine them with little black boxes around their head, and they're all on mute. And it's really hard to get them to engage in ways that we're used to. I find them to be quite passive. And, there's things for a whole course with me. I actually taught a course as dean, and it wasn't until the end that they came up and they made a comment to me like, I have my own business, and this really helped me. And it's like, well, why didn't you tell me that 6 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago? I mean, what made you think that it was okay to wait until the end rather than to participate? Because I think a lot of the dialogue that's happened with the Zoomosphere is kind of very clunky. It's hard to have a meeting on Zoom. You're on mute. You raise your hand. I think that natural interpersonal interaction is very different, and I find them to be very passive learners. And I'm always trying to prod them to say, what questions can you ask? I mean, to get them to prompt AI, but what questions do you want to know? And a lot of people don't even realize that they should ask questions or that they can. And I think it's our job to get them to question more.
Thank you.
Paraphrase your question. We've talked about transition, past, current, future, higher ed, and changes in faculty, but what about the students that we're receiving? And again, like you said, the traditional 18-year-old is coming in with a very interesting educational experience. Again, many of us have children or know people who went through that experience. I have a nephew. There was no teaching going on. I was sitting there watching what was happening, and it was really frightening to me. He actually took a gap year, and that was good for him. But I see the learners coming in. There's a confidence level. In some cases, the confidence is higher than it needs to be, and in some cases, it's not high enough. So again, I think the key is, and again, I learned this at MDC, we had wonderful tools there, as you can imagine. We had the EAB Navigate, and we used that. So I come to the smallest college in the nation, and they don't have all of those tools. So how did I scale that down? Because the key word was early alerts. And so one of the things that we implemented right away when I came there 2 years ago was getting those 25% progress reports, whether it was a 8-week class or a 16 or so on and so forth. And, you don't force people to do things right away. I was tracking what faculty were submitting these. And of course, we told them they all were supposed to, but not all did, right? But then we were tracking the evidence, and we have a student success center. And so when somebody gave the alert, somebody at the Student Success Center was on top of it, got that student the resources that they needed, because you never know what's causing somebody to suddenly be at risk. It could be academic. It could. So many students had IEP plans in high school, and they think something magical happens the summer before freshman year that they don't need them anymore. So did they have an IEP plan that they needed to get accommodations, and they didn't want to do that initially? Are there just homesickness? Is it homesickness? Is there substance abuse? Is there, bullying going on? Do they just feel alone? Who knows what the issues are? But that early alert gets to that. And I can tell you, I wish I could quote the stats to you, but I could tell you that increases the retention rate in that class, and therefore in school exponentially as well. And the other thing is, again, that MDC implemented, and when the pandemic came, we offered it online. And got there's online partners out there that you can contract out with. But the tutoring at my Missouri Valley, I like to call it coaching. We don't call it tutors because students don't like to go to tutors, but we call it academic coach. And having, especially in the gateway courses, because that's where, if they don't pass English, they're not going to come back. If they don't pass algebra, and are they even supposed to be in algebra? So that means student advising has to be spot on. That paying attention to those details when the student's coming in, looking at the transcript, not just looking at a GPA. The GPA might be 3.5, but what was their score in algebra or the math classes? And similarly with English. Do we put them in this math class or that math class or a different math class based upon what their career path should be? Helping them to feel success that freshman fall term is critical to them staying and coming back. And so early alerts, advisor engagement, and paying attention to detail when you're advising initially, but also student success teams that can follow up on those early alerts, create success plans, hold them accountable to those success plans. And time after time, I can't tell you how many emails and just verbal stories students came out. I've only been there 2 years now, but I would hear stories saying, "Thank you for meeting with me." And they said it in their own way and in their own language, but you held me accountable. You made me go see this person or that person, and then you followed up with it. When I send out probation letters and suspension letters, it is full of opportunity for them to follow up. And I also always follow up with them again. How are you doing? And making sure that, we're tracking it. And again, we're a small college startup. I say it's a startup. It seems like it. We've got spreadsheets that we're sharing. We talked to the student this day at this time. So-and-so reached out this day, this time. That's our version of EAB. But it works. And it's time consuming. But it's a lot easier, and then when you're just talking about operations and schools staying afloat and not closing down, it's a lot easier to retain a student than it is to go fishing for a new one. So when you're talking about a skeletal crew for recruiting, okay, I'm wearing my recruiting hat today as well, you have to think about those things as well. Retention is obviously a student-centered topic, but it's also the lifeline for the institution to stay relevant.
All right. Looking at the clock here, I want to respect your time here. Even though we don't have time for other questions, I want to encourage you, though. That's one of the great things about this summit. There's the opportunity to talk with folks in between sessions and so on, to take advantage of that opportunity with our panelists after our session, during lunch, whatever the case might be. So I want to, before we end, offer our panelists one last opportunity, if you would, to just share any final thought or takeaway for our audience and our listeners.
I feel like, at least in my comments, and maybe to a certain extent across this, I think there is a certain amount there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that makes us feel less optimistic than maybe we are in other contexts. And I guess I just want to end by saying I still think this is an awesome job. There's no doubt that conferences like this, institutions that we're at, serve a really vital purpose. We are going to have to be more flexible, and I think we can expect more changes in the future. But I also think that, I have a lot of confidence, especially in the new assistant professors that we hire, new instructors, even the students who are coming in. They do seem to be more phone focused than maybe class focused compared to prior generations. On the other hand, I see a lot of the same curiosity, potential to be sparked, valuing of the whole experience. And so I just want to end on that
Great.
confident note.
Thank you.
I want to go back to something that my colleague said before. I was 18 years old and free and had a lot of choices to make, and I don't know about you, but I didn't make a lot of good choices at 18. I made a lot of really big mistakes. I think offering too much choice to those students overwhelms them. I think if we focus and say, look, here is a degree map. If you follow this, if you don't take 6 courses when you should be taking 5, or don't take all your heavily quantitative courses in the same semester, good advising is so key. And I think we think that faculty have a knack for this, and a lot of faculty don't. The advising staff are professional people, and they know how to do this. And I used to go to the orientations and say, you see these 2 women over here? Listen to everything that they say. Do what they say, and you'll be fine. Ignore them at your peril, because you will make mistakes. So I think helping guide students is really, really important. Investing in advising, supporting the advising staff, and helping them make good choices by not giving them 4,000 GE courses from which to choose, but more sections of courses at the times that they want. Because I don't know about your students, but my students say, I really wanted to study this to expand my horizons. No, I need a 3-unit general education course on Thursdays at 10 a.m. So let's make sure that we put those courses there that serve our students, and not because the faculty wants to teach their research. I think it's serving the students and helping them get through.
Thank you.
I want to just go back to something I talked about with partnerships, because one of the key pieces to the success in a former institution where I was dean of education was creating partnerships with school districts. And one of the key pieces that I'm trying to bring to this, I brought to MDC as well, is reaching out to those local employers surrounding your institution and asking them, what have we done for you lately? It's not about what they can do for us, but what have we done for them? And what do they need? In Miami-Dade, where you think the opportunities are in abundance, and they are, but there was a particular company who had employees that they were given X number of $1,000s a year to go to school for higher education, to get degrees and so on and so forth. Only about 20% of their employees took them up on that. 20% were just like leaving money on the table. And when asked, are there any of them that need upskilling? Do any of them need degrees? Would any of them get promoted if they had more credentials? Yes, yes, and yes. And so we had meetings and reached out and had those conversations and offered. I think one of the key things that brought us to success in my prior institution before that was the fact that we would meet people where they were. We would hire adjuncts who had credentials to teach that actually worked with that entity, so they knew the person, they trusted the person. The courses were there at their place of work. They didn't have to drive and race to get to a class. Those partnerships, again, in some cases can help with your traditional student, but in other cases, it's like you said, the students that have left for a while or never maybe started, drawing them back in and making those experiences fun. I had the pleasure of listening to my daughter's MBA class last night in the hotel here. It was so fun. And I was just listening to how the faculty was engaging, that asynchronous class virtually online, and how they were bringing real world problems. And that's what you can potentially help with those partnerships as well. What problem do you have in your business that you need to be solved? And how can we help you to skill your employees to be able to solve that? So I think that's important. We've got to start thinking like Google and like Amazon and give those services as well in that same way. And I'm sorry, I was never in an ivory tower because I came from K-12, right? I don't feel like my head was ever there. But we don't need that anymore in higher ed. We don't need that kind of thinking, in my personal opinion. And truly, when I'm hiring faculty, I really make sure that the faculty are entrepreneurial in nature, student impact in nature, and everybody is a recruiter. And I hate to use that word because it's seemingly, tied to money and everything. But I believe in higher education. And my final word is higher education brings opportunity, which brings upward mobility to anybody that participates in it. And that's our goal, is to make this world a better place and give more opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our guests for sharing their insight and expertise with you today. And thank you all for being part of the Future Insight podcast. Thank you.